thank you very much. I'm Barbara Herren. I was with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. I've been recycled now as a consultant to them, so I don't put their logo on my presentation, but I do want to present to you an FAO perspective. I think I can speak from that because I've been leading their work in pollination for the last 11 years. And I would like to thank very much the organizers for this session, and also give good credence to the government of Brazil and the organizations in Brazil, which from a global perspective are really the country and the organizations that are the strongest supporters of pollination, I think, in the world. You've done so much, really. I need to go with the mouse. Yeah, so I don't need to necessarily repeat this. I mean, we obviously have many more facts than we did when we started out, say, 20 years ago on the importance of pollination services, the number of flower and plant species that are highly dependent on animal vectors for successful pollination, and the incredible diversity of pollinators that we need to address in conservation. So I'm going to focus more on agriculture. We always revert to this study from Klein et al. In 2007 about the importance of pollinators to crop production, with 1/3 of every bite and 75% of all of our crops being dependent to some degree on pollination. We have the nice studies from Marcelo and his colleagues on the growing demands for pollinator-dependent crops, which I think are really remarkable statistics to look at the growth in pollinator-dependent crops globally, but a very, very strong growth in the in the developing world, which is really interesting from the standpoint of food security and nutrition. Again, with nutrition, we have very interesting data about the contribution of pollinators to human nutrition. And now, I think from a global perspective, we're really trending away from only talking about food security. It should be in the same breath, food security and nutrition, or food and nutrition security. FAO is even backing away from the statistic that we need to increase food production by 70%. Yes, just ramping up the amount of yields, say, of staple crops is not really going to address food security. It's really increasing the production of nutritious foods in the places where we need them. So another recognition that we have more recently is the contribution of pollinators to yield and to quality. And there's a lot of attention now on food waste, realizing that we waste 30% of the food that's produced. And there are so many resources that go into producing the food, which then results in nothing. These are two photos from Kenya, strawberry on what would be your left that was well pollinated, and one on the right that was poorly pollinated, which really won't go to the market. And the runner beans in Kenya are produced under grow lights and a very expensive sort of production so that they can have a long day in the tropics. But if they're not well visited by bees, that produces a sickle-shaped pod, which then is thrown out. So all the waste, all the resources that have gone into this just go to waste. So pollination and crop yields. We have the data from Klein et al. In 2007, which the authors of that paper would as well acknowledge that a lot of that was based on expert judgment, that a systematic understanding of how much pollination exactly contributes to crop yields has been a bit lacking, and I think it's being picked up by a number of people. We've had some presentations here which go down into a better assessment of that. Bernard Vassier always told me that Rubik's work on the coffee yields was a major natural experiment that then gave us some idea about the contribution to crop yields, but maybe there's some difficulties with that as well. So really getting down to how much pollination exactly contributes to crop yields has been a bit of a limitation, because a lot of the work in pollination has been done more by environmentalists and not so much by agronomists. So within FAO, we had a large global project that went on for a number of years, and we were able to develop a protocol for assessing pollination deficits, which was meant to be a very simple field-based methodology comparing the optimum levels of pollination service with current levels. And it was meant to be very realistic for farmers, so we did not use paintbrushes to paint pollen on stamens. We were really using the whole plant as an experimental unit, and we worked very hard to modify this and apply it in circumstances in developing countries, in small fields, home gardens, and with high environmental variability. So it was developed with our colleagues in the Global Pollination Project, and was modified then in Brazil, Kenya, Ghana, South Africa, India, Pakistan, and Nepal. and applied in all of those countries. So that was the original countries involved in this project. And then as the intergovernmental platform on biodiversity and ecosystem services was being developed, there was an interest in having some more supporting information to support the assessment. So we were approached and asked to extend this protocol to another 6 countries, which then was Colombia, Argentina, Zimbabwe, China, and Indonesia, and Norway, because Norway paid for it, actually. So we brought in a number of additional countries to be able to apply it under really a very, very broad range of circumstances. And this resulted in a Science magazine publication in February of this year. The analysis was led by Lucas Garibaldi. We had 344 fields from 33 pollinator-dependent crop systems in small and large farms from Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Some of the authors of this study are here, Bettina and Blandina. The results of this study found that for fields with less than 2 hectares, it found that the yield gaps could be closed by a median of 24%, which is a tremendous contribution to yields. We certainly look for that in other aspects of agronomy to find a way that you might be able to contribute to a yield of 10%. 24% is quite substantial through higher flower visitor density. So that was under small, diverse cropping systems. For larger fields, the benefits could only occur at high flower visitor richness. So the larger, more, say, commercial or industrial levels of agriculture could have this benefit if they, at the same time, could increase diversity, not simply the abundance of pollinators. And so the study really gave us a nice demonstration that ecological intensification can create benefits both for biodiversity and for yield outcomes. So the take-home message was that smaller, diverse cropping systems can benefit and also be very beneficial for pollinators. And good crop management practices are something we'd done an initial survey, but through the work of FAO, we've been working on accumulating more evidence of what good crop management practices could be in different places, and they're often very specific to different environments. So we have farmers in Ghana who've really worked on weed management underneath their mangoes to increase the number of pollinators that are attracted both to the weeds and to the mangoes. Also in Ghana, we had farmers who sort of took this concept of introducing hedgerows for pollinators, which to a very small farmer with very limited land, there's just not a possibility that they can take some land out and put it into flowering hedgerows simply for the pollinators. But the farmers in Ghana planted cassava, which doesn't need pollinators, but is very attractive. The flowers are very attractive to pollinators, to get them pulled into their fields to pollinate their chili peppers. So this was sort of their own innovation. Obviously, reduction and elimination of pesticides, promoting bloom sequences between coffee and cardamom in India. So we will continue to sort of pull together these good crop management practices and produce these profiles of them. But at the same time, I just would step back just a moment. And within FAO, we've come to a point right now in the last couple of years where we've, as many organizations, sort of faced the fact that agriculture is under a lot of pressure and a lot of criticism altogether, and that we need to perhaps develop a new paradigm for agriculture. And we've often approached it too much through silos. So we have a long history in working on farmer field schools and IPM. We've now been working quite a bit on pollination. We've really tried to step back and try to understand how we could bring these more together into more holistic management practices. Just recognizing that the current food system we have is not really effectively functioning. We have still such a large proportion of undernutrition and malnutrition, way beyond what we should have. A recognition that our global diet has become much more uniform over time, which has a lot to do with nutrition security, and the fact that while we have a lot of malnutrition, we have a lot of global obesity, all of these sort of factors make us feel like this food system needs to be really reworked and revamped in some way. And so in the last couple of years at FAO, we're trying to address how we can bring, say, our work on pollination into more holistic farming systems, such as agroecology. We have a new director general at FAO who's Brazilian and is very understanding of agroecology. So this has been something that we've been able to work on further, to recognize that diversification has multiple benefits and not solely for pollinators. And farmers will never really be managing only their pollinators. It's the system altogether. So we have been looking at how we can go from traditional farming systems with few inputs. We've gone in the direction of more uniformity and more regulation dynamics of conventional intensified farming systems to greater diversification, complexification, in the additive effects of more agroecological farming systems and ecological intensification. So I will end a little bit early. I don't need to take up all of my time, but in multiple ways, farming landscapes host a large share of the world's biodiversity, and that works both ways because that's extremely critical to human livelihoods. I think we can create ecosystems which are mutually beneficial to biodiversity and to people. Agriculture doesn't need to be the enemy of biodiversity.